Alright. Death of Ivan Ilych by Leo Tolstoy. It's not just a story about dying, it's a story about realizing you never truly lived a life. Anyways, so hello everybody, I am Amar and welcome to the Amar Archives. So this week, I read a novella by Leo Tolstoy. This one, as you can see here, The Death of Ivan Ilych. Anyway, so beware, this video will have spoilers, and I'm gonna talk about it in very detail. And I really like this novel, and so I'm gonna talk about it. So basically, novel, right? Um, the novel opens with the main character Ivan Ilyich death, right? And then Ivan's colleagues, right? They hear the news of his death sitting in a courthouse, and then they don't feel sorrow. They calculate career opportunities from his death, and that uh, from his death, a job position has opened and promotions are available, and life moves on without Ivan. All right, and then moving on, at the funeral of Ivan Ilyich, his friend Peter Ivanovich, he feels uneasy. He feels uneasy looking at Ivan's dead body or corpse, because who wouldn't, if your friend dies, anyone would feel uneasy. Anyways, so he was feeling uneasy, and there was a look on his face. It was almost like a warning. So, right, so everybody is like basically lying to him. The doctor is lying, the friends are lying, and then there's one person, right? There's one person, his name is Gerasim, right? Gerasim is a peasant boy who is Ivan's peasant servant, right? And then he is the only person who speaks very honestly, right? And right when people say that Ivan's death is tragic, Jerasim replies with that we all shall, all of us shall die. We all shall, wait. We shall, all of us die, right? He says that. My bad, I mixed the quote up there a little bit. Anyway, and the story goes back. It dates back to 30 years, right? When Ivan Ilyich was an ordinary man. He was not evil. He was not extraordinary. He was just average, and he liked studying law, and he pursued respectability, and he learned to, you know you learn to behave like, when you sit in people of high social standing, you learn to behave like those people, so you learn to behave like them. And then, right, his guiding principle was simple. His guiding principle was that he should live just like how society approves of him to live. And then, with this guiding principle, he marries, he marries, of course, not out of deep love, but because getting married is proper. And then his wife becomes difficult during her pregnancy, and then when she was being difficult to him, he ran and escaped into work. He worked a lot, and the work became his, a friend. For example, if I'm suffering with something, if I'm tired of a person, right, I would work a lot to avoid that person. That's what Ivan Ilyich did. Then there, and then while working, he controlled people's fates with his professional detachment. And then at home, he maintained formality with his family, his wife, and all that. Anyway, Ivan had a thought that he was living the good life, and he was proud of living correctly, but that was wrong. That was his thought that he was living correctly, and he was falsely proud of it. Anyway, years go by. Years later, um, Ivan Ilyich finally achieves a pretty prestigious position. Right, he moves into a new house, and then all that stuff. You get a prestigious position, and you move into a new house. And then, while he was decorating that house, he slips. Right, he slips from the ladder, and then he hits himself on the side. On the which side, that's not mentioned. And he hits himself on the side, and to him that injury feels minor. Of course, you know if you get hit by something, you'll think it'll just go away in a few days. But What terrified Ivan Ilyich was not the pain of the side, the pain of whatever pain, be it physical or anything. Meaninglessness really terrified him. That's for sure. Anyway, so Ivan Illich's family, right, his daughter and his son, his wife, they continue their social routines, right? They talk about recovery and they pretend that they pretend they pretend to do things and they pretend to love Ivan and all that. But Ivan, Ivan feels something else. He feels like he is what would you say? He is surrounded by artificial people, fake people. They are lying to him, and no one admits to him that what is happening, if they're lying or not, except for Gerasim, the slave boy, the well, not exactly slave, uh, his peasant, basically, you would say, not slave, but his peasant who was quite honest, I think, yeah. Anyway, so when Ivan was sick, he was really sick, right? Gerasim really cares for Ivan. Ivan asks Gerasim to hold his legs up to ease the pain on his side, and Gerasim does not lie to Ivan. And Gerasim is 100% certain that Ivan is dying, and Gerasim accepts it without fear. And basically, Gerasim's compassion, it becomes a silent contrast, basically, to the shallow world that Ivan had built. Built on success, built on what society said him to be, and all that. And then when Ivan is lying on the sofa, he's unable to he is unable to move, right? And then so he replays his life. He's laying there on the sofa, and he's replaying all his moments in life. And then that's when he notices something disturbing, right? He notices something really disturbing. And the further back he goes in the past in his memories, the more joy he finds. For example, um, if I'm sick, right, um, and then I just am in the hospital bed and I'm thinking about it, I'll find more joys in the past, in the childhood, and I'll think that my childhood sincerity, right, and people weren't lying to me. Because that's what Ivan is feeling. He feels that his childhood was sincere and his mother cared about him and all that stuff. And then he compared it to adulthood, which had a lot of performance. You had to perform to survive. Anyway, moving on. So he also feels that his career and his marriage and his social climbing all were driven by you know what society thought of him, what his appearance looked like, right? For example, me, right? Me, Amr, I become a doctor, and then I say that I should get married and I should just do this and that just so people will like me, and then that's a wrong way to live your life. It's driven by appearances, and that life does not live long. Anyway, he dreams he dreams repeatedly of being put in a black sack, I guess, and well, not put into it, but he repeatedly dreams of a black sack that he's pushed into it, and he resists being pushed into it. And basically, the black sack, it represents death to him, but it also represents the truth. And the more Ivan insists that his life was proper, the harder it is to fall through the sack, right? And then finally, when he is near his death, right, something shifts in him, right? And then I guess his son comes into his room, and his wife also comes into him. They're all crying and they're all kissing his hand, and then he feels genuine compassion. I was rooting for Ivan to feel something from his cold demeanor. Anyway, so he starts to feel genuine compassion for the first time, and he realized that his family is suffering too because of him, because of his way of life, right? And he understands that where his fear came from was living a false life, living falsely. And then that is the moment he accepts that his life was artificial, and he chooses compassion instead of self justification, and that or himself, or self absorbed people there are. and then his terror disappears. Darkness turns to light, and then Ivan Illich, like, he stretches himself and then he dies on the couch, on the sofa. Anyway, I think the take on this is that, unlike the beginning of the novel where his death is being told and his people or whatever, the lawyers or judges, they're trying to steal his place, his spot, but his death is not hollow. It is an awakening type of death where he realizes what he had done wrong, and you know what kind of life he lived, which, in my opinion, he lived a very wrongful life. Like, you don't get married just for appearances. You don't become a lawyer just for appearances. A judge or a judge, you don't become those for appearances. You become them because you get a job. Basically, if you get a job, you get a job because you love that job more than you love people, right? And you don't do things for appearances, and that's my take on it. Anyway, uh, this might contain spoilers and a lot of that stuff, but I think this novel is really good, and it makes you reflect on your life. It makes you reflect on what kind of life you're living. Like, if someone wants to become a neurosurgeon, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon once, but then I thought, why am I pursuing this career? My thought was that if I become a neurosurgeon, someone will marry me, and that's a wrong way of thinking, right? Anyway, so that's about it. I read this by Leo Tolstoy. It's a really great book, and then it makes you realize and reflect on other things. Anyway, yeah, thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe, and make sure to follow my Instagram, the Amber Archives, and goodbye. See you later. This might contain spoilers, so I'm giving just a warning at the end of the video. Anyways, I will see you next week, maybe in the next 2 weeks. Amber out.